I am Courtney. I write the blog Outlander Behind the Scenes, and I do some crew and cast interviews as well as this discussion is becoming a habit. And today we are discussing episode 407, Down the Rabbit Hole. Who else is here with me?
I'm Antoinette. I'm drinking some white sangria. You might get some uncensored opinions. Mark it down to the alcohol.
I am Catherine. I have bourbon and eggnog. It's that time of year, and I have my hat.
Love your hat. Love your hat.
Thank you.
I'm Carmen, and I write the Outlander Anatomy blog, and I am a retired professor of human anatomy, so my blog works very well with my almost 40 years of teaching experience. And I am drinking Good Earth tea tonight.
I am drinking some Balvenie 12, which I dearly love. Neat with a little splash of tepid water.
Oh, well, shut my mouth.
We're going to dive in, ladies.
Mhm.
For me, overall impression of 407, this one I had to watch a few times. I purposely reserved judgment until I watched it a few times. I did find it, the first time I watched it, I found it pretty engaging. You know, I felt pretty like, wow, what's going to happen? But my overall impression is that it is like 402, Do No Harm, in that it had so much going for it in terms of always the sets and costumes and acting. But there were just some choices and storyline that for me really didn't work. So it took me out of the episode. And so as a whole, for me, the episode didn't work, unfortunately. But some things did work. So I look forward to discussing that with you guys.
Well, the first time I watched it, I enjoyed it because I didn't know what was going to happen next. It was very obvious. They had made a lot of adjustments. And since I had read the book, it was nice not knowing what was going to happen next. That was the first time. Every time I watched it, I liked it less and less. And I finally stopped watching it after the halfway through the fourth time.
I watched the episode, and I have not rewatched it because for me, the episode felt like a missed opportunity to build on the momentum from the two previous very strong episodes. I found myself watching the episode and throughout going, what the bleep? And my mouth hung open and I was just saying, what am I watching? And I have not rewatched it, obviously. So the episode did not work for me. There were some things that I appreciated, but overall, it was a no from me.
Carmen?
My general impression was that actually there were parts of it which were quite compelling, I felt, as I was watching it. The first time I was really interested in where it was leading, you know, and what was going to happen, because at first I was worried that they were going to paint Laoghaire as a good gal. Completely good gal. And I will say that one of the things that I liked was at the end, Bree and Roger are where they're supposed to be. They're heading for North Carolina. So the episode did what it was supposed to do. There was a good deal of deviation here and there, but there were other parts that were really, actually, I thought pretty good.
Let's talk about our favorite scenes.
My favorite scene was actually there were several that were pretty good that I enjoyed. I liked the scene where Bree was with Joni. Well, when she was doing her hair in the garden, I thought that was sweet. I thought that it was it made me think about Marcelly and how she probably would have been with her sister had she been there, and that made me miss Marcelly and Laurel's acting. And the other scene that I enjoyed was the Stephen Bennett scene with the baby. The fear on the mother's face. She was obviously very scared. Uh, Roger was standing there, being very protective, and that menacing altruism, I guess is the best way of putting it. It was like he was being kind, but there was just something that just made you think, it just felt creepy, but he was being it just didn't he just did that really well.
Some moments that I liked. I really did love the performance of the actress who played Joni. She really sparkled, and I really liked her performance. I really liked Sophie's performance in with the interaction with Joni, and I found the scenes on the ship, the second one with where Roger was trying to protect the mother and the baby, and then Bonnett was going on about some game and throwing up the coin and whatnot. He's really coming across as really slimy, and I like that about him. So those are my favorite performances.
I really loved watching Larry transform from a welcoming matron to loony bins. Just conveyed anger like nobody can. I mean, she's just as fabulous. Nell was at that, and I really enjoyed watching that transformation, the skill which she projected. Now, it was really unnerving to watch the woman become unhinged and become completely compulsive about Claire and her image of her, or her imaginings of her. But I thought that was just really wonderful. I too will agree with Antoinette and Kathy, and that is that I liked the scene where Morag Mackenzie and her baby were being protected by Roger, and where he was waiting to find out what his fate would be in the hands of Bonnett. And Bonnett was wearing Claire's wedding ring on his little finger at the moment. And what was interesting to me was that Roger was saving his 6th-time great-grandmother's child, or his 5th-time great-grandfather. And I wasn't sure whether he put that together, because I think Claire did show him his genealogy sheet. So I think he knew that Morag married William Buckley Mackenzie, but from that sheet. But sometimes I get mixed up between the show and the book. And that's one area where I'm not sure that he knows that, but I think he does.
Yeah, I can't remember if he knows that in the book at that time. Do you remember?
Yeah, the book, yeah.
He does?
He does.
Yeah. No, I don't think he did, because he kissed her at one point. And it wasn't until later he found out she was his...
But I think he kisses her because she is.
Yes.
But I don't know if he knows on the boat.
Yeah, I don't know in the show whether he knows it yet, but he knew in the second book, Dragonfly and Amber, what his genealogy was. Because he says, you mean I'm the descendant of the witch and the warlord?
Yeah. Well, there's some other forgetting that goes on in this episode. Brianna forgets a lot of details in order to make this episode happen. But before we get to that, my favorite scene, I think, is actually the one between Frank and Brianna about the obituary. I found that one very compelling because, well, I think Tobias is an amazing actor, and I felt Sophie did her best scenes with him. I thought she really shined with him, and I liked that creative change, and I just felt like it came off really well, that particular scene. And then I actually liked the scene with where Bonnett is throwing the girl overboard and Roger saves her, or doesn't save her, but, is horrified. I thought that one was really great. So any standouts? And that can be elements like set, costume, cinematography, or performances. Any standouts for you guys?
Joni, and I'm blanking on the actress's name, but
her name is Layla, but I can't remember her last name.
She has the most classically beautiful face I have seen on television for a long time. She just it's like a face you'd expect to see in a Rembrandt painting, but it's also a face you'd expect to see, on a runway. I mean, she just has this face that's just beautiful. And her accent is so it just makes me smile. No matter what she says, I just smile when she comes on the screen and she talks. And then she's such a good actress on top of it. She plays off of everyone very, very well. Her performance is way more mature than what you'd expect given her age.
Yeah, I think her face is so open. That's one of the things that's so great about it.
I think Sophie did extremely well in this episode. I think, especially in the scenes with her and Frank, I think she really held her own up against him, and I liked her performance. I thought it was strong. Sophie, for me, was a standout in terms of carrying the episode as she did. I've already said Joni, and Roger gave me hope for his character going forward. Because he's not one of my faves, but I saw something there that gave me hope going forward. So so those were my standouts.
I will say again that Nell's performance all the way through, she was just so mercurial and so damaged as a person, and I thought she conveyed that really, really well. I also liked Roger's scenes, not only the approach to Bonnett in the tavern, but on the docks when he was convincing him that he should take him on as a crew member, and it was very clever to simply pick up something and say, here I am, I can do this work, after Bonnett says no. And then the two scenes on the ship that were so moving, the child, the pox child being dropped over by Bonnett, and then her mother going after her was just heartbreaking, because that is believable. That, if that's all that mother had, that's actually believable. And that Roger, got up to see what it was like and knew instantly there was no hope. So he stopped there. And then the final scene, which we've already mentioned. So I thought Roger did a very, very nice job in this episode, and it's building toward he's going to have quite a bit more to do later on in this season, I think. I thought Bonnett was great. He's a person that you love to hate. And I agree. I think that that Sophie was much stronger this episode than some of the other episodes we've seen her in. Here, actually, I think she's been stronger. So I was pretty pleased. She had a lot to do in this episode. I thought Ian did well, as always, with what he had. I wish he'd had a little bit more meat. I wish that he had been given a chance to blossom, because I think he's quite an actor. I think he's a very capable actor, and would love to see a little bit more of him.
Well, my standouts were Tobias and Nell. Those were probably my top two. I talk about those storylines later, but I thought they did a great job with what was put in front of them. And Richard, I feel like for me, he's always solid. Steven too. Like, they're always solid. They're like the costumes and the sets. So it's almost like you don't mention them because they're always great. That's how I feel about them. And I also thought the actress who played Joni, Layla, I don't know her last name, but I thought she did a great job. And Sophie, I felt, was stronger in this episode. I felt she was a bit inconsistent through her scenes. But some of them, she was really, really strong.
think we missed a really key opportunity when Carmen says she wants to see more of Stephen Cree. And no one got that. Okay, maybe it's just me.
No,
I was like, me too. No, I'm kidding.
I have a lot to say about that, actually.
More of his acting.
Yes.
More of his acting.
Oh, yeah, that too. But anyway.
Catherine. I'm blushing.
Okay, I'm going to behave myself.
What worked for you in this episode and what did not, and why?
Okay, what worked for me was the actually I like the flow of the change of Nell, of Leary, from being motherly and caring and then just turning into this a witch, basically. The transformation. The other was her the sadness in her eyes and in her face throughout. It was so clear, as Carmen mentioned, she was just damaged. But for everything else, I think the key term that I've heard each of you mention was missed opportunity. There were just so many missed opportunities. But I do like Tobias, so I do like his acting, but I thought they did too much of that. There was so much emotion to Brianna coming into Lollybrook in the house. I mean, even though Jenny, they acted as if Jenny not being there somehow meant they couldn't have those scenes. He is just as good as an actor. He could have, they could have had him sitting there staring at her and saying nothing, and it would have put more into that episode than half the things that were said. I would have taken out the whole graveyard scene. Added more Stephen Cree, added more. I think the boat scenes with Roger, they were too rushed and choppy. They should have drawn them out a little bit more. But I thought the scenes that were done there were done well. I would have made it more like last episode. That's the easiest way of putting it.
What do you mean by that? Like what? How?
Well, it flowed much better. It was just more sophisticated. Last episode was more sophisticated. It was like we had graduated from college and then we're stuck back in elementary school this episode. And it was just, again, intellectually lazy again. You know, and it was just so many missed opportunities for real, for the actors to really shine. And it was as if they only wanted Sophie to shine, even though she was good, but it's just that everyone else in the scenes were just given so much more.
All right. What worked? The music worked. The costumes worked. I thought the scenes on the boat worked. I thought that, you know, I have loved to see the brave creative choices that have been made in season 4 so far. I thought the adaptations, the ways that they have gone away from the story have not detracted, but have really added to the show, because the show is a different entity from the books, and I know that and I get it. And so far in season 4, I have applauded and really enjoyed the choices that have been made. And then having had the 2 very strong episodes, yes, we have hit our stride. Now it's only going to get better and better and better. And lo and behold, we have 407. We have Frank and Leary. Now, I think I understand why they thought they needed to show more of the backstory with Frank and Brianna, but I thought I disagreed with it because I felt that they underestimate the intelligence of their fan base and the audience that watches this show. She showed us her conflict and her angst in the Dragonfly and Amber episode when she was so angry with Claire. And she showed that conflict. She showed us that she came to terms with it in Freedom and Whiskey. She was the one who said to your mother, you gave up Jamie for me. No, I have to give you up. So we know, we get it. We understand that she loved Frank. And so she is going to feel conflicted. There was no need, in my opinion, to go back and re-emphasize and give more backstory to that. unless Bree is an unsympathetic rock, she is going to feel that conflict. It's natural that she would feel that conflict. What they were trying to convey, I think we already got, and we already know. The next thing that didn't work for me was the reintroduction of Larry at the expense of Bree getting to know the Fraser side of her family. That would have made more sense to me to set up going into the new world after Jamie and Claire. So yes, I understand that Laura was not available, but I cannot believe, well, I'm only saying this from my perspective because I don't know what challenges they faced. I don't know if Stephen was only available for an hour when they were shooting, so they had to get in those 3 quick scenes because he had somewhere else to be. I don't know what went into that decision, but I thought that setting up that, I thought, unnecessary drama with Larry and trying to poison Bree's mind against Jamie and all of that, I was like saying, why are we here? How is this advancing the story? How is this telling us more about Brianna? How is this setting us up for when she does reunite with her parents? And it didn't do any of those things for me. And so that did not work for me at all. Despite the brilliance of the performances, I just felt that we stalled in this episode because we had gotten up such a head of steam with 405 and 406 and lost the opportunity to advance the stories, to give more layers to the character. I would have preferred to see Bree wander around an empty Lallybrook, looking at Ellen Mackenzie's painting, clutching her mother's pearls, trying to find the cave that her father spent 7 years in, and trying to make that connection. Because I think that dramatically, that sets us up more, because it would be more conflicting for her to make that connection with Jamie and his family while still being burdened with the guilt of her love for Frank. I think dramatically, that would have been a great setup for her to go to Wilmington in search of her parents. And if it is, I'm sorry, I'm going on about this. You can edit me out later, Carmen. And if it is that there are production constraints with showing those things in Lallybrook, then take her straight to the new world. Just cut out all of that. Just bring her straight to Wilmington. Let us see that. Set us up for that. I felt cheated. That's how I felt. I felt cheated of the story, the setup for her going to the new world in search of her parents. I'm sorry. The end of rant. Let me drink some more.
Does anyone else think it was a missed opportunity when they cast Lizzie so tall?
Yes.
I actually think that Lizzie looks exactly like I would think Lizzie would look.
Really?
Except for she's tall.
You mean mousy and nondescript? Yeah.
She is mousy and nondescript, but she's supposed to have blonde hair and tiny and very, shy. I thought her father was exactly as I pictured him, but I thought Lizzie is Wymus is. We'll see, though. There have been other instances when they cast Claire. I thought, my God, she's
huge,
and 3 inches taller than Book Claire, but she's turned out to be lovely in the part. So we'll see. I thought Lizzie had more presence than I would expect from the book. She looks like she's a woman of some substance of character, and Lizzie in the book, it takes her a while to get there. She gets there, but when Bree first meets her, she's pretty timid and meek, and so I was surprised by that. I want to go to what I thought worked. When Bree woke up in Larry's house, I thought that was a really interesting twist to the story. And I know that they do this sort of thing because they want to flex some creative muscle, the writers do. And so I think it's very clear that some latitude is given to them in that regard. I would have preferred if she had made her way to Lollybrock, as already been mentioned, and that there she is confronted by Larry over the pearls. Now, it turns out that I read the script today, and actually in Larry's house, it was written that she had the pearls fell out of her dress, and Larry snatched them up, and there was a tussle between them as to who was going to get them. So the pearls actually were part of the script, and then all of that was cut. But I think that could have worked even without Jenny, as has already been mentioned. I think there are other things about the backstory that they could have used in Lollybrock, as was already said, to cement that Fraser side of her family. That said, I think what they did with the sojourn in Larry's house was interesting, that she was already planting the seeds in Brianna that her father didn't want her. And that's why he sent her mother back. So, because he didn't want a bairn, and she's just, people gossip here. And that was very sly and just very believable to me and consistent with Larry's character. I think she's seductive, and I think that she is not truthful, either in her manner or in what drives her through the world. But they decided to go this other direction. So given that they decided to do that, I actually thought that was a fairly effective, because I can always watch now. I did think it took Bree an awful long time to figure out who this woman was. There were a lot of hints dropped. And if you remember, and we do, back in season 2, her mother told Roger and her all about, the witch's trial and who did it and what happened and all of this. So I would have thought, she's a pretty bright girl, right? I would have thought she had put it together a little bit quicker than what she did. She got there, but it took her a really long time to do that. And then I had to think, where did that horse and buggy or carriage come from, the wagon that they drove to Lollybrock? Because I didn't see any barn or any pasture for a horse or, accommodations. And I have to say that Balrigan is a pretty darn nice looking house. So Larry doesn't have too much to complain about. Looks like Jamie is keeping her fairly well. The first part where he and Fiona go up to the stones seemed a little truncated, and it turns out it was because the script called for him to try twice, as he does in the book, and they cut that out. So that's why it seems like it's just kind of goes from, well, bye, to you're going to disappear through stone now. And Fiona seems a little bit sort of, not very moved by that coming event.
Okay, well, we're all kind of on the same page. I honestly think the Frank flashbacks worked. And I listened to the podcast, and Meryl said they held out, for a really long time to try to get Laura, and then they scrambled and did the Leary storyline. And for me, what makes the episode not work is the Leary storyline. It's not the Frank flashbacks. I feel like they used the scenes with Stephen Cree with Ian as a vehicle to give her clothes so that it could be explained why she's wearing Claire's outfits later. I mean, because there's no other substance there. Mm-mm. In fact, Brianna has no lines. He says all this stuff and she's like, oh. And then he turns around and is like, you have the fire of the Frasers in you. And I'm like, how would you know that? You haven't spent any time with her. Their scenes to me were the most awkward. It was completely not believable that they had any relationship. She had way more relationship with Leary, with Joni, with pretty much everyone else and then the cousins were like these mute kind of
trunk bearers.
It was like they didn't even introduce them. They're like, mistress. She's like, it's like, where this is your cousin. There was none of that. So I felt like everything worked up until they could have even had her. I to use your phrase, the intellectually lazy, Kathy, I think you first coined that, but to have Brianna not know that Lollybrock is like between where she is and where she's going is intellectually lazy. So what I would have done differently if I was the writer is I would have had everything happen because I thought, okay, this makes sense, and especially knowing Ron D. Moore, he really likes to explore characters to give them dimension. And so, okay, Leary did produce these two great daughters, Joni and Marsley, so that's fair. But why not have Ian come that night after she's read them the story about Ruth and whoever from the Bible, and then wake her up with the fight, and then you can have like the shit hits the fan, like this girl's here, she's actually has family, go into the porch, she has family somewhere, you're from Lollybrook, oh my god, I'm her, blah, blah, blah. And then you do the pearls and the whole thing, and then you go to Lollybrook, and then Ian says, I'm taking her, and then you have time for Lollybrook scenes instead of all the more Frank flashbacks and Leary. It's like we're exploring Leary and we don't really care about Leary. She's a minor character in the show, So to me, it made sense to do the Frank part, but I believe that they plugged in Leary because she feels plugged in to me. I think that part of the storyline is what really tanked the episode for me. And then gluing on the Lollybrock stuff the way they did. So I would have just had it be shorter and done a segue, gone to Lollybrock. And I think Stephen Krieg could have easily pulled that off. You throw in young Jamie and some grandkids and young Janet we met in season 3. We could have, they could have done it, but for some reason in their minds, without Laura, it just wasn't going to fly. So
I don't know why they just didn't have her wake up in Lollybrock and have all the things that happened with Leary happen with Ian. Him, nursing her back to health. Him just fascinated. I mean, I could just imagine him sitting on the bed, just staring at her like, oh my gosh, she looks so much like Jamie. I can't believe his child's in my house. And then had the conflict with Leary when she comes to the house, and then they had, could have done it that way. I mean, because that's what it felt like.
That's leaving.
I gotta say, I understand why they want to bring Frank back a lot, because they like Tobias. And we like Tobias. I don't know of anybody who doesn't think he's a terrific actor, but I just thought there was too much of him. We know what their relationship was. And there was some odd sort of awkwardness to that. I mean, where did she get the tea set the next morning outside of his office to bring all of those, milky tea to him? There's some things very odd about that. And another thing I want to say, because I'm always bothered by details, is when you have a warming pan, it's full of hot coals. You don't set it on its edge by the hearth. When you're done with it, you lay it down until it cools, and then you empty the coals out of it. If that lid comes off, they're going to spill all over all over. Warming pans were a bit dangerous, actually. So
I love the input from our pioneer woman, and it was I don't know if you guys listen to the podcast, but Meryl's like calling it a bedpan, and then she's like, and she goes, "Why don't we use bedpans anymore?" And Tony's like,
"We do."
And then she says, well, wait a minute, you mean chamber pots? And then she's like, no, what do you call that thing? Anyway, it was really cute.
They caused a lot of fires.
Yes. Yeah. Just like real candles on a Christmas tree used to.
Put real candles on Christmas.
Yes, they did.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. Well,
sparklers too.
Not in Jamaica.
When Joni and she pull up, and that's how she's like, this is Jamie Fraser's daughter. I was like, what?
Yeah. I'm sorry your mother's a witch.
And Brianna's like, oh, well, thanks anyway. Thanks for the ride. You know,
Oh, God.
You're married to a frog.
Yeah. There was just so many interactions that were so unnatural. And I know that it was the writing, obviously. I mean, it wasn't the acting. So it was just sad. I mean, after I watched a couple of times and I just felt really sad. Just like, why did you? It's almost as if whoever wrote this episode, it just seemed like they didn't care a lot about Outlander and they didn't love it. And you could see that there were actor favorites. There was absolutely no reason for Ian to be given such a truncated part.
I've got to say that it might ease everyone's opinions about the writer to read the script, because actually she wrote a lot more than it was taken out. For instance, out of the blue, did you hear Ian say, "You have her eyes"? Who's the her that he's referring to?
Claire.
No. In the book, it's her grandmother's eyes that he says to, or one of them says, it's either Jenny or him, to her. And that is in the script. It got cut.
That was the other thing that wasn't totally believable, that, here's this woman, and it's not like you see a lot of people coming through the Highlands. And if she looks just like Ellen, and he's got this portrait he's looking at every day, and then he sees this girl, he's going to be like, wait a second, this person looks familiar. There was just a lot of, the fact that she had no idea who Leary was. The name didn't ring a bell. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. My sentiments exactly. I don't know.
I don't understand also is, in all of their research, even with Claire, how did Claire not find the obituary when they were looking earlier?
So I would have, yeah, that's true, but I would have had Frank burn that. There was even a fireplace in that giant office, to make sure this isn't going to be found.
Finds it anyway, of course. But I do want to say that of the Frank scenes, I like the one in the car between he and Bree, where he, says, "Will you come with me to, to one of the universities? I've been offered a job at Oxford, and you can go to school in England." And I thought that's an important part of the story that fit here. I didn't care for the graveside scene, and I thought the office scene could have been done but shortened. And the Easter egg in this episode was apparently the obituary that he had gotten. And apparently, I assumed it was Reverend Wakefield that found it for him, did the research and sent it to him. And that was the Easter egg that in this episode. They always try to put one in, and that was it.
That storyline worked for me. I thought it was actually really good. I think they had said that him, creating a grave at St. Kilda was a little too
complex
to really show. And so they went with this storyline, which I bought. I thought it was good. Yeah. I just think that crowbarring, shoehorning,
Warning.
Get your minds out the gutter.
That was a slip, but it's about Leary. So shoehorning Leary in there is what made it just kind of make it too unbelievable.
In terms of the obituary, did anyone actually pause and read the letter? I tried to. I got some of it, but essentially in the letter, Reverend Wakefield was telling Frank that he was worried about his mental state. So I read on Twitter someone else had done it, and they were. So I was like, "Oh, let me see if I can read it." And sure enough, in the second part, it said something about his concern about his mental state. The whole Frank story, anyway, and the historic what he knew and what he didn't know, to me, just seemed very. It never seemed to be explored very much. But if Roger could find it, if Bree could find it, if Claire could find any information, that Frank had all of it, including the obituary. The other part in there was when Bree said, Well, you said they're getting divorced, but you're old. What in the world?
I could see a kid saying that. I could see a kid saying that.
But she wasn't that much of a. Not maybe she's a different 18-year-old than mine.
17. She was 17.
I mean, that wouldn't be the first thing out of my 17-year-old's mouth, but maybe in the 60s. I don't know.
I think it was an odd choice of words. I think if they had said, but you've been married, she had said something like, but you've been married for so long, why?
Yeah, now that makes more sense.
Now.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of dialogue that didn't make sense to me. Like, I don't see Bree bearing her soul to a 10-year-old or however Joni is, like talking like they're equals. When you're talking to a kid that age, there's a little bit of a more of a filter going on with most people. And I realized that was a vehicle for the flashback, but just the dialogue could have said like, I understand what you mean. My mother was in a marriage like that or something, just. And just a note about my understanding is I went through the Stones convention, which I highly recommend if you guys are ever looking for one. They don't have like the whole cast there, but it's so well done. She does it every 2 years, and it's just a very thoughtful, well done convention. And this year, Terry and Ron and Ed Spaliers were there, and Ron talked about the writing process, and it's my understanding that the exec producers, which would be Tony, Matt, Ron, and Meryl, actually choose the main story elements. So they would have made the call about Frank and Leary, and then each episode is assigned to a writer, and so that writer will give the dialogue and the scene nuances and stuff like that. And then they'll often get overwritten, and stuff gets taken out in editing and stuff gets changed. But it's not the writer who chose to do it, Frank and Leary and all that stuff. The exec producers went down that road.
I don't want to come across as feeling that I know better than the producers because this is their job. This is what they do. I am no expert, but I am a fan. I love Outlander and I love the series. And what I want to see is them produce good TV, which we know they can do. We just had 406.
Yes.
We know that
and 405.
And 405. We know that when things come together, they really produce compelling television. So this departure for me was just baffling.
Yeah, I do think this was a indulgent episode in terms of the creators deciding this would be interesting for us, and clearly they know it's not going to be what the fans want by what they're inside the world. This is something they wanted to do, but again, I think it was exacerbated by the choice to make. To do Frank and Leary, and then look at the similarities there, because we loved 406, which was a complete character exploration and relationship exploration, but it was of the main characters.
Yeah.
No, Courtney, it wasn't just that it was a character exploration of the main characters. It was a development. You could see the progression of the story. You could see things that were foreshadowing, things that were to come. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everything had been building up so nicely. And then 407 comes along and we're dragged back to Frank and Leary. What the actual... Don't condescend to us.
I have a question, though.
Take us back to kindergarten to explain stuff to us.
Wait, I have one question.
Yes.
I have a question for Carmen, actually.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just me, but when the child with smallpox,
Yes,
I wasn't shocked or disgusted or appalled when he pushed the child out of the window.
I
just kept thinking it was for the greater good. Okay, he's slimy and he was ever, but I was like, you can't have a child with clearly who has smallpox on a ship. Everyone's gonna die. That's the only thing they could have done.
I was going to say, it's not the first time that type of dilemma has been portrayed from history too, where one person is sacrificed so that so that the rest of the people might be able to escape that fate. Smallpox is not as infectious, believe it or not, as measles.
No.
But it is pretty infectious. And not only is it transmitted by breathing the air, the droplets from a person's nose or mouth or pharynx, that it might be aerosolized by breathing it in by a person who's not infected. But it survives in the secretions from a person and on fomites such as bedding and clothing and things like that. So in that regard, it's pretty transmittable. And so I wasn't horrified by the fact that that had to be done. What was horrifying was that it was done in such a callous manner. And not that I don't know how you would have done it, but at least, most people would show some remorse for it. And Bonnett is just totally,
he made a show of it. So
yes,
that was part of it. Yeah. He didn't need to do that.
His power. It was a demonstration of his power as captain, I believe. And, but yeah, the smallpox was a horrible disease that killed 500,000 people a year in the 18th century.
Well, if it goes into their bedclothes and their clothes, could they really get rid of it by even just pushing them overboard?
Well, it would spread. They couldn't get rid of it, but by keeping her around, it would have spread. I mean, it just would have. There was no way they would have been able to contain it.
Increase the transmission.
Yeah, they couldn't have contained it at all.
Yeah.
Especially in the days where people didn't wash. It's like they didn't understand germs. And then
somebody probably just got right in her bed when she left, and then.
Well, I'm sure that other people got it, but that's why he said, and even in the books, that was every single person who had a fever was thrown overboard.
Yes.
And that was why Morag's baby because the baby was teething, had a fever, but it was not from infection. It was simply that the baby was teething, and Roger knew it, the mother knew it, and that's why he hid them. Yes. I don't think he hid them because he knew they were related to him.
Not at that time, no.
No, he just did it because out of kindness, and he just felt a connection to her.
And he had just seen what Bonnett would do.
Yeah.
If he saw anything that looked remotely like. What did you guys think of that portrayal? Was it realistic, the makeup job and all that?
Yes.
Small. Although you don't see it anymore, but I've seen a case of someone who had smallpox, but didn't who have it at the time, and they are pox. I mean, they are definitely have in East Africa, it was actually quite common to see people who had it. It just basically just pustules, and that's basically what they did. Yeah. They made it look like pustules on her face.
Yeah, if you look close, there's a little dent in the center, and that's what the smallpox pustule has. It collects fluid, but in the center, it has a little umbilicus, a little dent right in the center. And that was also on the men at the burning of the Comte's ships. Those men also had, the makeup was good. It was believable. If you see a full-blown case of smallpox, so pictures of it, it can cover the body so there's not those lesions, so that there's not an inch of the body that isn't expressed in those horrible, horrible lesions. They're just awful. And it's caused by a virus, another virus.
Yep.
And there's a couple of forms. There's a very virulent form, and then there's a form of smallpox that isn't doesn't cause the same amount of death. But back in those days, 30% of people who got it died. They died. So
wow.
It's pretty horrible. And so, they did do things like that. They banished people and put them on islands. And by the way, it's called smallpox. Do you know why? Because the great pox is syphilis.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Different, yes. So smallpox, the name was coined to differentiate it from the great pox.
Do you get syphilis pox other than your genitalia?
Yeah. It depends on what stage you're at. Yeah, you can get it. You can get it all over the body, but I think it's a stage 2, isn't it?
It would be stage 2.
Yeah.
It's interesting though. Just talking about it, I mean, you learn about it, but you so rarely see it. Smallpox, I distinctly remembering in medical school being told well, this is what it is, but you know, it's been eradicated, so
Yeah.
we're not going to spend any time on it.
Yeah,
And,
you know what? That's because in 1980, the WHO, the World Health Organization, declared it eradicated from the globe. What they didn't tell you is that there are certain laboratories that keeps the strains alive.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, we have one in the United States, and I believe there's one in Great Britain.
In Atlanta, if I'm correct. This at
I
the
believe it might
CDC.
be in Atlanta. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like Jurassic Park.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It wasn't a coincidence that the people who had Ebola, who were brought back to the country, were taken to Atlanta. Because that's where it was.
Is that Atlanta the disease capital? Maybe.
Well, it's where the CDC is.
Isn't that where you live, Antoinette?
Yes.
You live in Atlanta?
Yeah.
So, are we going to get a chance to talk about her ankle?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, let's. I wanted to ask Antoinette. Did you want to make any legal comments about Leary and her alimony?
Leary and her alimony need to take several seats. First of all, her marriage to James Fraser was not legal because he was still married to Claire, who had not died. So therefore, that contract of marriage between Jamie and Larry was unenforceable, and she's not entitled to any alimony. Jamie only agreed to the alimony out of the goodness of his heart because he is Jamie and he didn't want to leave her and her daughters destitute. So if she's going to be talking about she's entitled to not one fin dime. Nell Hudson is brilliant.
Yes, she is.
That portrayal is just off the charts. Brilliant. But in the Brave New World, in season 4, I don't give two bleepity bleeps about Larry.
Enter stinking unlawful demands for alimony.
She's the reason the story went forward, because if it hadn't been for the alimony, Ian wouldn't have been kidnapped. They wouldn't have gone for the jewels. Ian would have been kidnapped. They wouldn't have ended up in the north. So she kind of was very instrumental in that.
Was being
the operative word.
Let's talk ankle.
I did like her sprained ankle and her dipping it in the snow melt. Holding it in the snow melted water.
Wait, what'd you guys think of her seeing the road and then stepping off the hill?
I'm trying to figure out how she twisted her ankle doing that. Unless her foot caught. I mean, there is a way I guess it could have happened, but of all the injuries, I would have thought that would have been the least of her injuries if she had fallen the way she did. The ankle and the side, there was a lateral ankle. It was a little bit high. Based on what they showed, I would have thought it would have been a fracture rather than just a sprain. Basically, it's the whole Rice thing: rest, ice, compression, and elevation. She didn't do the compression part. She couldn't do the elevation, I guess, because she was walking on it. And she didn't rest it either. So I guess she only did the ice. That was the only thing that I saw in terms of her treatment that worked. But I couldn't. Carmen, you may be able to speak on this. I don't know the timelines of when medical information became common knowledge. So I don't know if at that point, if the Rice
well, she would have known
acronym
from Claire, right?
Well, I don't know if that was considered, if that was already, because there's some things that now we take for granted that actually hadn't come about in the 60s and 70s. So I'm not sure if that was well known of how to take care of a sprain at that point.
I think it might have been for a sprain, but there's other treatments, that use ice now that have come since then for sure. But I don't really know. I can't say for sure that it wouldn't have been in her mother's knowledge. I thought the symptoms that they demonstrated were accurate for basically a class 2 ankle sprain, but it was tender to the touch. She could walk, but it hurt her. It was bruised. It was swollen. And it was on the lateral
malleolus.
And you know, the public calls it an ankle bone. It's actually the end of the leg bone, both on the inside and the outside. The outside, it's the fibula, and on the inside, it's the tibia. But they form those big knobs, and that's where she tore the ligaments probably, or stretched them very badly around. That was what they were trying to portray, I believe. And tore some of the blood vessels, because that's what accounts for the bruising that we saw. She was, you know, trying to hobble on it the very best that she could. So I thought that, you know, I thought that worked. I thought that whole part went on a very long time. It could have been, I think, shortened and still conveyed to us the pain involved with it.
One of the things that I thought was another missed opportunity, in the books, they make a big deal about her intelligence. She's a very intelligent mother. She has a very intelligent father. Genetically, you would have assumed that she would be intelligent. She was nurtured, so you really expect it. And she was an engineering student. You would have thought they would have taken that opportunity to show her fashioning a crutch out of all the trees and branches that were around her when she got closer to where she was going. The first thing I noticed when she fell against the tree, and I looked around, I was like, I could see at least 6 things that she could have used as a crutch. And I'm like, ugh. Her ingenuity is one of the things that is a repeated theme throughout the books. And I'm not a purist by any stretch of the imagination, but they just seemed like they had opportunities to really allow the characters to come through, and they just didn't take them. And that was one of those opportunities.
My big theme is I feel they traded Nell for Steven, and I feel that didn't work. I feel like Steven would have worked better. I mean, he could have carried off the Lollybrook storyline without Laura, I think, because he's a very strong actor, and they could have padded with Connor McCary and these actors from season 3 and a bunch of grandkids. Again, I think Nell did a fabulous job, but I feel like that is what didn't work and made this episode feel unbelievable. I think the Frank flashbacks would have been more powerful had they gone ahead and done Lollybrook without Laura. That's my big theme.
I think my big theme is just simply missed opportunities. They missed a lot of opportunities that they could have set up it to stay a little bit more closer to the books in ways that would have been important, not necessarily in a purist form, but one of the things that has just been really bugging me is that everyone kept complaining about how small Sophie is. That she, you know, the whole point of Bree was that she was tall, she was large, she was imposing. So this would have been the perfect opportunity to get a really diminutive actress to play against her, so that it made her seem bigger.
For Lizzie, you mean?
For Lizzie, yeah. I mean, if Lizzie were tiny, it would have made Bree seem big. Now they've made her seem smaller because she's so much taller than she is. And the other is that, again, the Stephen Leary situation. Although I have to say, I didn't mind the Leary scenes just because I liked her acting, and I had no idea where it was going, so I found it interesting. But I did feel like watching Stephen in the scenes he did was insulting to his talent.
I think the big theme that I took out of this episode was seeing the journey that Bree went on, and her commitment to finding her parents and warning them that their house is going to burn down and take their lives in an effort to change history. The very long trudging through the highlands, the falling and spraining her ankle, the being sideswiped by Leary, thinking that she had been taken in by a kind woman, and then Bree making it to Lollybrook, and then finally to the port and buying passage and then leaving. My great-grandmother left Denmark. One of my great-grandmothers left Denmark at 16. And her family didn't want her to go. They took her, she had a trunk with her clothing and her dowry in it. And her father and brothers came and took it away because they thought she wouldn't leave without. She was sailing to America, and she went. She did have an uncle on the ship with her, but that's quite a voyage to take. And there was not the kind of assurance that we have come to expect when we get on an ocean liner, and sail the Atlantic. These ships were pretty darn tiny, and the Atlantic, the North Atlantic can be fierce. So I think it's, it wasn't for the faint of heart to get on those ships and take that voyage. And so I wish they had been able to convey the courage that it took for her to step forward and move forward. It's not just like getting in your car and driving to the mall. So I think that, I'm accepting that that's what this episode was about. Her journey, her commitment, her desire to reach her mother and Jamie and tell them what fate is awaiting him.
My theme from 407 is loss of momentum, and can we get back to the braving the new world?
I'm listening to this book with Porter, and staying just ahead of where we are in the show, and there's so much good stuff coming.
Well, one thing that about this episode was that it makes me look. I look forward to what's going to happen with Roger and Bree. In the book, I couldn't care less, but actually watching, I'm now interested to see what happens.
Oh, that's interesting you say that, Kathy, because I'm the same. I skip forward. I skip the Roger and Bree stuff in the
books.
But in the show, especially with Bree, and even this flawed episode that 407, she got me on board. So I'm interested to see how Bree fares in the new world, and by the same token, obviously, how her relationship with Roger and that dynamic with the four of them. They've piqued my interest now, so I'm looking forward to see how they choose to show us that in the next episodes coming.
Richard has made me more interested in the Roger character.
Yeah, his acting is really good.
He also gives Roger an edge that I don't think he has in the book. Like Lord John Grey's edge went to Roger. Just a comment about Roger's costume. We thought you asked what are those culottes he's wearing last week, Kathy? Yeah. And I don't know if you saw Terry Dresbach was on Twitter talking about that a lot. She didn't actually do that costume. I don't know how you say her name. It's like Nina Ayers or something. Her co-designer this season did that one, but they showed lots of pictures of the 18th century, what people were wearing. And I don't know if that was specifically sailors, in which case...
Yes.
That's what I thought it was sailors. It was the corduroy part that threw me a little, but when I saw it, the first thing I thought was, oh, it's a sailor outfit. But it just seemed funny on Roger, that's all.
And then how did Roger know he was going to be a sailor? Somebody brought that up.
Yeah.
I said that, but the other co-designer said that she took his clothes from the festival that he attended, and she reworked them into the various layers that he had tried to use those clothes to make himself look more like he belonged in the 18th century. And Bree's cloak was actually the one that she wore at the festival too. So they recycled on purpose a number of the garments from that to make them look like that. And she said that Roger did have the idea of a sailor in mind when he chose the shorter breeks or pants or whatever they called them in those days.
Well, he knew he was going to be on a ship at some point because he knew he was going through in Scotland and knew he was going to try and get to North Carolina.
Yes.
So, and
in the book, he goes so quickly, he doesn't have time to get very much money, which is why he ends up being a sailor.
Yes.
Yeah. I think what's going to be interesting to see what they do with Stephen Bonnett. They seem to be keeping him pretty true to form. And so that he was by far one of the most interesting characters So I'm glad to see that they've kept him true to form, and I want to see what happens to him next.
You know, can I piggyback on something you said about Bonnett?
Mhm.
I've liked him so far, but I think they have to be careful that he doesn't, because I think sometimes he borderline is a caricature.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there are some elements of it that almost remind me of Captain Sparrow from
Yeah.
those movies.
Caribbean. It's interesting you should say that, because they actually, he said he's fashioning himself after Mick Jagger, and Johnny Depp said that he was imitating
Keith Richards.
Keith Richards.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that they were both, that.
And I got
both
that
of those
knowledge at Through the Stones because Ed was there. I was completely riveted by him in the earlier episode. This one, I didn't buy his character as much, and I didn't know if it was because I knew that about Mick Jagger, because he was kind of, a little Jack Sparrow, or if it was because I had already, my suspension of disbelief was already not suspended anymore by that point in the episode.
No, I can see what you're saying about the caricature, though. Because I kind of got that feeling when he was telling the story. Okay, when he was telling the story about how he was supposed to, he was going to be sacrificed. There was a point in there where there was a sadness in his face and a sadness in his eyes, and I thought, oh, that's nice. He's not trying to be
swaggering.
He didn't swagger his way through that. Yes, but then he flipped right back.
As far as I'm concerned, every season has an episode that is forgettable. We have had one in every season, so I'm going to chalk this down as season 4's that episode.
I see this episode as a necessary bridge to bridge the gap between the 20th century and the 18th century. And there are some things that I missed. There are some things that I enjoyed. I wouldn't, as we've all said, it doesn't rank up there with our favorite, but I thought there were positive things about it. And I'm grateful that they're on their ships now and they're headed for North Carolina, where I want them to go.
What are you most looking forward to coming up?
Seeing more of Fergus and Marcelly, and also Ian. I just like their characters. I want to see more of Ian.
Young Ian.
Yes, young Ian. Well, old Ian if we could, but hey, if they're doing flashbacks.
And Joe Abernathy, right?
Of course. Well, that's a given. That's every time.
Carmen, how about you? What are you looking forward to?
The thing that I'm looking forward to the most is what many fans are, and that is Bree meeting Jamie.
I'm looking forward to see Jamie beat the crap out of Roger. And I have a feeling.
I think they're going to have Frank do that. I heard.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. Ghost Frank comes back and beats the crap out of Roger. At this point, nothing would surprise me.
Just joking. I'm looking forward to that whole him going to the Indians and then young Ian, what's going to happen there. And I think that part's going to be pretty fascinating. I'm actually excited for Brianna to reunite with Claire too.
Yeah.
Because, they never thought they were going to see each other again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my darlings.
Yes.
This was not quite as hilarious but it's just not
a lot of hoeing, just a lot of humming.
That's a good one.
There was a little hoeing in there.
Well, thank you guys so much. And
all right.
I will be
that time of year.
Carmen, you be good.
All right. It's been
all right. Merry Christmas, everybody.
It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you ladies. And I
Yes,
hope
I
you all
agree.
have a fantastic Christmas.
Thank you.
And I'm hoping that I get to speak to you all before the new year.
Yes.
But, enjoy yourself. Drink as much as you want. Eat as much as your stomach will allow.
Oh, let's do our toast because Carmen, you dropped off last time. We didn't get to do a toast.
Oh, I don't have anything.
I left my
okay.
glass in the kitchen. So I'll give you all
Cheers.
a salute.
Well,
I'll give you all a salute.
Cheers.
cheers.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. She's like, what the beep? What the beep?
What can you expect from a hoe?
Oh, God.
But